There were 2 dinner plates in the sink. 2, but only 1 fork. That's how I knew someone else had been here, and they brought their own fork. You don't think about these things when you're happy. You don't count utensils like some kind of detective in a crime drama. But when you've been emotionally starving for a year, you notice every crumb of reality left behind. I didn't say anything to her that night. I just stared at that single, foreign fork and felt my stomach twist in a way food couldn't fix. She walked in 20 minutes later. Hair curled, lip gloss still perfect, laughing softly at something on her phone. She looked alive. Alive in a way I hadn't seen her in months. I was sitting on the couch, TV on, volume off. She glanced at me and said, without stopping, "You should really start turning the dishwasher on instead of just loading it." No, hi. No, how was your day? Just that. And I swear to God, I thanked her. I nodded and said, "Right. Sorry." Like a little kid scolded by a substitute teacher. Because that's who I'd become in this house. A mistake on legs. A walking inconvenience who paid for internet she no longer even used to talk to me. The silence was so loud that night, I could hear the hallway clock blinking. We slept in the same bed. Well, she slept. I laid there like a corpse waiting to be identified. Her back turned to me, as always. And then, just before drifting off, she whispered something I wasn't meant to hear. "He's so much more confident than you." I blinked. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. I didn't need to ask who he was, or how long he had existed in our story. All I knew, in that moment, was this. She stopped being my wife long before I ever stopped providing for her. But that night was the last time she'd ever enjoy my silence. The next morning, she left early, too early for someone who didn't have a job. She hadn't worked in over 8 months. She called it a creative sabbatical, which apparently meant sleeping until noon, ignoring me until dinner, and then disappearing once the sun went down. I never asked where she went anymore. I already knew she wouldn't tell me. And if she did, I wasn't strong enough to handle the lie. But that morning, she left before sunrise. Quiet. No coffee. No perfume. Just a shadow slipping out the front door. I waited until I heard the car start. Then I got up and began unplugging things. Not out of rage. Not revenge. It was spiritual. I started with her vanity lights, the ones I installed myself 2 years ago, so she could film makeup tutorials she never followed through with. I unplugged the glowing mirror, the curling iron, the ring light. I wrapped the cords neatly and left them on her side of the bed. Then I moved to the kitchen. I took apart the espresso machine she swore she needed, even though I'm the one who always cleaned it. I packed it back into its original box and placed it next to the trash bin, not in it. Just close enough for her to wonder. The Bluetooth speaker? Gone from the bathroom shelf. Her voice assistant? Unplugged mid-sentence. Her electric foot spa? Disassembled, drained, and placed inside the tub like a corpse in a crime scene. And the Wi-Fi? I didn't turn it off. That would have been obvious. No, I changed the name of the network. From Home Sweet Home to ask him to pay for this. And the password? Stopacing 2025. I waited. Sat on the couch like I always do. No TV. No music. Just me and the clock. I thought I'd feel powerful. I didn't. I felt empty. Like I had just burned down a house I still lived in. She came back around noon, holding a grocery bag with 1 single avocado and a bottle of almond milk, like that was enough to claim she'd gone shopping. She walked in, dropped the bag on the counter, opened her mouth to say something, and stopped. I could see it hit her. The lights. The mirror. The silence of the kitchen. No music playing automatically. No scent diffuser humming. Just quiet. She didn't ask anything at first. She just walked through the house like it was haunted. Then, finally, she turned to me and said, "Did the power go out?" I looked at her, dead in the eye. "No, I just stopped powering things that don't benefit me anymore." She blinked. Swallowed. What is that supposed to mean? I stood up, walked past her, opened the fridge, took out 1 yogurt. The last one. Closed the door. "It means I'm not your landlord, Blythe. I'm your husband. At least, I used to be." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood there, blinking like someone trying to remember if they left the oven on. And in that moment, I realized something that nearly made me sick. She had become so used to being taken care of. She had no idea how to react when it stopped. But I wasn't finished yet. Because what I did next, the thing that really shook her, had nothing to do with technology at all. She didn't say a word for the rest of the day. And neither did I. We were like statues living in a museum of unfinished arguments. Every sound felt too loud. Her footsteps, the clink of her spoon against the ceramic mug, the creak of the floorboard outside the bathroom. She was acting like nothing had changed. But everything had. I was no longer her power source. At around 5 p.m., I heard the freezer door open. Then a pause. A longer pause. And then her voice. Calm but cold. "What is this?" She held it up like she was pulling a dead rat from the icebox. An envelope. One of those long, official-looking ones. Cream-colored. Sealed. No name on it. Just sitting between a bag of frozen broccoli and a tray of turkey meatballs. "Open it," I said, without turning around. I was sitting at the dining table, laptop open, pretending to check emails I hadn't cared about for weeks. I didn't even look at her. I wanted her to open it alone. She stood still for a few seconds longer. Then I heard the rip of paper. Silence. Then a sharp, brittle sound. Paper hitting the tile floor. She had dropped it. Inside the envelope were printed copies of our bank statements for the last 6 months. But only hers. I'd highlighted all her transactions. Gas, makeup, streaming subscriptions, Uber rides, takeout. Her daily iced oat milk lattes. That weekend trip to visit her cousin in Chicago, which included a 5-star hotel she booked under my Amex. And at the bottom of the last page, I had handwritten a single line. "He's more confident than me? Let's see if he's also more generous." She didn't pick the paper back up. Just stood there, frozen like the meatballs next to where it had been hiding. Her voice cracked a little. "Are you spying on me now?" I finally turned to her. "No, Blythe. I'm waking up." I had been sleepwalking through this marriage for over a year, burying myself in bills, in errands, in the role of quiet provider, while she slowly erased me from her life. I'd bought her time, bought her comfort, bought her freedom, and she used it to emotionally evacuate our home while still reaping the benefits of my loyalty. And now that the benefits were gone, I saw her panic starting to seep through the cracks. "This is petty," she muttered. "No," I said, standing up slowly. "Petty would have been canceling your gym membership mid-Zumba class. Petty would have been mailing your texts to your mother." She flinched, just barely, because she knew I could. She walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving the envelope and its quiet scream of guilt on the floor. I didn't pick it up. I wanted it there, frozen evidence thawing on the tile, soaking truth into the grout. Later that night, I heard her in the bedroom, pacing, then crying, then silence again. I didn't go in. I didn't offer comfort, because for the first time in over a year, I wanted her to feel cold, just like I had. But this was only the second domino. She had no idea what was coming next. The day after the envelope incident, she did the dishes. Not her dishes, the dishes. All of them. For the first time in nearly a year. She didn't say anything while doing it. No sarcastic jabs. No huffing or passive-aggressive slamming of cups into cabinets. Just stood there with yellow gloves on, staring blankly out the window above the sink while scrubbing a glass she hadn't even used. It almost made me laugh. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. I didn't speak either. I watched her from the hallway like someone observing an animal try to figure out a trap. Because that's what our house had become. A nest of silent triggers and unsaid sentences that cut sharper than screaming ever could. Later that afternoon, I went to my appointment. She didn't ask where I was going. She never did. It wasn't couples therapy. Not anymore. We tried that, once. Back in February, I begged her to go with me. Told her I didn't feel seen, didn't feel wanted, didn't feel like a husband, just a housemate with a wallet. She rolled her eyes, said therapy was for people who like to hear themselves talk, but finally gave in after I booked the session and practically bribed her with a weekend trip. We went. She didn't speak for the first 15 minutes. When she finally did, she looked at the therapist, a soft-spoken man named Carl with kind eyes and a notebook full of patient optimism, and said, "I'm not the one with the issue. He is." And then she spent the next 20 minutes explaining how my neediness had drained her, how my lack of ambition was suffocating, how I made her feel like she was babysitting a grown man who couldn't handle a strong woman. I sat there, eyes wide, heat crawling up my neck. Carl glanced at me and asked, gently, "Wesley, do you feel like your needs are being heard in this relationship?" Before I could answer, she laughed. "Oh God, here we go." That was the first and last session we ever had. So now I go alone. Once a week. Same office. Same chair. But now, Instead of holding her hand while she condemns me to a stranger, I sit there unpacking pieces of myself I didn't know were still alive. This time, I told Carl about the fork, about the envelope, about the coldness in the bedroom, the emotional frostbite that had become my marriage. He leaned forward and said something I didn't expect. Have you ever considered that you may not be grieving the end of your marriage, but the end of your role in it? I stared at him. He continued, sometimes we don't mourn the person. We mourn the version of ourselves that existed with them. The provider, the caretaker, the fixer. When you stop doing those things, the relationship doesn't feel broken. You do. That thought haunted me all the way home. Because he was right. I didn't miss her. I missed the usefulness, the purpose, the illusion that I mattered, if only because I kept the wheels turning. And now that I'd stopped, I was nobody to her. Just a man she couldn't manipulate with guilt anymore. When I walked through the door that night, the house smelled like lavender cleaner. The kitchen was spotless. The trash was taken out. There was even soft music playing from her phone. I looked at her. She looked back. I'm making soup, she said, like that would solve anything. Okay, I replied, walking past her. But in my mind, something was already boiling. Because the soup wasn't for me. Not really. It was an offering, a distraction, a desperate rewind button pressed too late. And while she was stirring broth like it was 2021 again, I was already preparing the next reveal. This one wasn't going in the freezer. This one, she'd find in her closet. She hummed while making that soup. Hummed. As if we hadn't been living in a house made of broken glass. As if everything hadn't been rotting beneath the surface. As if a bowl of carrot ginger broth was enough to wash away a year's worth of silence, contempt, and disappearing acts. I ate it. I won't lie. It was good. But I didn't compliment her. I didn't even look her in the eyes. She barely noticed. She was too busy pretending we were normal again. She sat across from me, texting with one hand, spooning with the other. At one point, she laughed at her phone, genuinely laughed. Not a courtesy chuckle. Not a half smile. A laugh. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to. I had found the receipt 2 days earlier. It was stuffed deep in the back corner of her closet, inside a crumpled Nordstrom bag she'd meant to throw out, but never did. I wasn't snooping. I was vacuuming. The closet floor was covered in shoes, wrappers, old scarves, and a random yoga mat she hadn't used since 2022. I lifted the bag to toss it and felt something hard inside. The receipt was folded neatly, tucked between a small black velvet box and a paper with the logo of a hotel 2 towns over. Not in her name. The receipt wasn't for clothes, or makeup, or anything I could explain away. It was for a silver men's bracelet, custom engraved. It read, "A little reminder of me, B." I stood there in that closet, holding a physical piece of proof that I wasn't crazy, that my gut, which had been twisting itself into knots for months, was telling the truth all along. She hadn't just checked out of our marriage emotionally. She had redecorated someone else's wrist. And the worst part? I didn't feel anger. I felt relief. Finally, I had something that matched the madness. Something tangible to point at when people asked what went wrong. Because up until that point, it had all been so invisible. How do you explain emotional neglect without sounding paranoid? How do you tell your friends your wife makes you feel like an unwanted roommate without them assuming you're overreacting? But now I had proof. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I needed time, space, strategy, because she still didn't know I'd stopped providing. Not just financially, not just physically. I'd stopped feeding her illusions, too. And soon, she would see exactly what it meant when the man she ignored started walking with both eyes open. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I took the receipt, scanned it, and printed a copy. Folded it. Slipped it into one of the books she never read, some vintage poetry collection she kept for aesthetic purposes. Left it sticking out just enough. I wanted her to find it accidentally. I wanted her to feel that cold drop in her stomach, that ripple of exposure. To wonder how much I knew. When I found out, how long I'd been carrying it in silence. She came to bed afterward with wet hair and asked if I wanted the rest of the soup for lunch tomorrow. I said, "No, thanks." She nodded, pulled her phone out, and turned away like always. She still thought she was in control. But the truth? She was reading the final chapter of a book she didn't know was about her. And I was already writing the ending. Our wedding anniversary came and went with no mention from her. No card. No awkward happy anniversary. Not even a meme. I wasn't surprised. I had long stopped expecting anything resembling effort. But what did surprise me was that she didn't notice what I'd done. I had prepared a gift. One final gesture. Not flowers. Not jewelry. Not dinner. It was a framed photo, one of our wedding pictures, but altered. In the original, we're standing on a wooden bridge under golden leaves. She's in her off-white dress, laughing with her forehead pressed to mine. I'm holding her hands. Everything about the photo screams romantic fall wedding. Except in the version I gave her, I had cropped myself out. Cleanly. Professionally. Seamlessly. Just her. Alone. Smiling into nothing. I wrapped it and left it on the kitchen table with a small note taped to the back that read, "This is what you wanted. Happy anniversary." Then I left for work. I waited all day for a text, an email, a furious call. Nothing. When I came home that evening, the package was gone from the table. Not in the trash. Not in the living room. I checked. She hadn't said a word about it. I was sitting on the couch later that night when she emerged from the bedroom with the frame in her hands. She stood silently in front of me, staring down at the photo. Her lips were pressed tight, like she was holding back a monologue. But none came. She placed the frame on the coffee table and sat down across from me. Still nothing. The silence stretched so long I could hear the hum of the fridge from the kitchen. Then, finally, "Why are you doing this?" I blinked slowly. Doing what? Her voice cracked. Turning this into a punishment. I know things haven't been perfect, but do you really think humiliating me is going to fix anything? I laughed. It was bitter and soft and a little pathetic. The kind of laugh that happens after you've cried too many times to cry again. This isn't a punishment, Blythe. It's a mirror. I just wanted you to see what it looks like when I'm no longer in the picture. She picked up the frame again, stared at it like it might shatter if she held it too tightly. She tried to say something else, but I interrupted. "Tell me something, and be honest," I said. "If you had to choose between getting your freedom back and being with me, which one would you pick?" Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "That's not fair. Neither is building a life with someone just so you can slowly abandon them." She didn't respond, just got up and walked out of the room with the frame still in her hand. But I could feel her panic rising, not because I was leaving, but because she was starting to understand that I could, that I wasn't her invisible servant anymore, that I had options, that the man she dismissed as too soft, too emotional, too dependent, was now calmly tearing down every illusion she thought protected her. I slept in the office again that night, not because she kicked me out, not even because I wanted space, because I didn't want to wake up next to someone who would rather rewrite history than admit they broke it. I heard her crying in the bathroom around midnight. The kind of cry where you're trying too hard to stay quiet but fail. For a second, I felt my chest ache, but I didn't get up. I couldn't afford to, because the next move I was about to make would be the hardest of all. And it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about drama. It was about reclaiming whatever tiny piece of myself I still had left. I used to write her letters. Not emails. Not texts. Not silly little birthday cards with glitter and store-bought rhymes. Letters. Full pages. Handwritten. Folded with care. Sometimes scented, sometimes smudged with my fingers from holding the pen too tight. I wrote them in hotel rooms when I traveled for work. In the car when she was late for brunch. On lunch breaks. At 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep and missed the way we used to breathe in rhythm. They were never dramatic. Just fragments of thoughts I didn't know how to say out loud. "Can't wait to see you tonight. You looked like poetry in that green dress yesterday." Sometimes I still feel like the guy who got lucky at that dog park. She never responded to them. Not once. But I kept writing anyway. Eventually, she stopped opening them. I found a small stack in her desk drawer about a year ago. Unread, unopened, still sealed. I didn't get angry. I didn't throw them away. I just stopped writing. Until last week. I wrote one more. It wasn't a love letter. Not this time. It was an obituary. For us. No blame. No attacks. Just a quiet autopsy of a marriage that had suffocated under the weight of avoidance. I wrote about the distance. The silence. The way her laughter had moved to other rooms. Rooms I wasn't allowed in anymore. I even admitted the parts one got wrong. How I'd enabled it all by pretending everything was fine. How I confused patience with self-betrayal. How I stayed when I should have spoken. Spoke when I should have walked. At the bottom, I signed it simply. "Thank you for the beginning. I forgive you for the ending." Then I folded it. Slid it into the back of the photo album she kept in the hallway closet. The one labeled B+C. years 1 to 3. The one she hadn't touched in forever. She found it 3 days later. I heard the moment she did. The album hit the floor. Pages splayed out like broken wings. I stayed where I was, sitting on the porch, pretending to read a book I hadn't touched in weeks. She came outside minutes later, letter clenched in her hand, cheeks blotchy, breathing like she'd sprinted through her guilt. "You wrote this for me?" she asked, voice already fraying. I looked at her, finally putting the book down. "I wrote it for closure. If it's also for you, that's up to you." Her lips trembled. For a second, I thought she was going to fall apart. But she didn't. She hardened. "So this is it? You're just giving up?" "No," I said quietly. "I already gave everything. I'm just walking away from an empty table." She blinked fast, like she wanted to throw the letter at me, but couldn't quite bring herself to let go of it. "You're not even going to try?" I smiled. Not bitterly. Just tired. I tried, Blythe. For 2 years. I tried when you locked yourself in rooms. When you laughed at messages I couldn't read. When you forgot our anniversary. When I made you dinner and you told me not to hover. When you compared me to someone else and thought I didn't hear it. She opened her mouth to reply, closed it again. For once, there were no clever lines. No deflection. No false sense of moral high ground. Just the realization that she had mistaken my softness for weakness, and now, she was realizing I wasn't soft anymore. I stood up, walked past her, and gently rested my hand on her shoulder for just a second. "I meant every word I ever wrote to you. Even this one." And I left her there, on the porch, holding a goodbye she never saw coming. But the final piece hadn't dropped yet. The moment that would either break her, or finally wake her up. Because the last thing I had done, something she still hadn't discovered, was waiting in the mailbox. And it had both our names on it. The envelope was cream-colored. Thick. No label. No stamp. No return address. I dropped it in the mailbox the night before, right after printing it at the UPS store 3 blocks away. It wasn't dramatic. No legal threat. No papers to sign. Just a letter. A real one. Not scribbled in some forgotten notebook, but typed. Neat. Intentional. Sharp where it needed to be, soft where it mattered. She found it the next morning. I heard the slot open. A pause. Then footsteps that stopped midway through the living room. I waited in the kitchen, pouring coffee. Not for her. Just one mug. Mine. She stood there in the doorway, envelope in hand. Her voice cracked before she even said a word. "You mailed me something from 3 feet away?" I turned. Looked at her. "I needed you to feel it arrive." She sat down at the table without asking. Opened the envelope like it was made of glass. I watched her eyes scan the words. The letter began. "Blythe, you were my favorite beginning. You were laughter in places that had only known silence. You were light in corners I'd stopped visiting. And for a while, you were home. I don't write this to make you feel guilt, or shame, or regret. I write it so that whatever comes next, for both of us, starts with truth." It went on to say that I had decided to move out, that I was giving her the house, the car, even the couch I hated. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that holding on is not the same as being held. I told her I hoped she found whatever she'd been chasing through locked screens and cold dinners. That I hoped she learned how to show up for someone without asking to be rescued. That she could still be the woman who made bat-shaped pancakes and snorted when she laughed, if she chose to be. But I wasn't going to wait and find out. The letter ended like this. "This is not revenge. This is me loving myself for once. And I hope you learn how to do the same. Goodbye, Wesley." When she finished reading, she didn't speak for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly. Her eyes weren't angry, just tired. She folded the letter once, then again, placed it on the table like it was something sacred. And finally, she said the one thing I never expected to hear. "I didn't know I lost you until it was too late." I nodded, took a sip of coffee, let the silence breathe between us. Then I stood up, walked to the hallway, and grabbed my overnight bag. Nothing big, just a few clothes, a charger, a toothbrush. When I turned around, she was standing now too. Tears in her eyes, but not begging. Just seeing me. Really seeing me. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet," I replied. "Somewhere I don't feel invisible." She took a shaky breath, then stepped forward and, for the first time in nearly a year, hugged me. Not tightly, not desperately, just gently. It felt like a proper goodbye. I walked out of the house without slamming any doors. No shouting, no drama, just closure. And as I got into the car, I looked in the rearview mirror and and saw her standing on the porch, holding the letter like it still had heat. Maybe she'd change. Maybe she wouldn't. But as for me, I drove away lighter. Not because I'd won. Not because I'd hurt her. But because I finally chose me. And in doing so, I realized something no one had ever taught me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave. And sometimes, the most healing thing you can hear is nothing at all.